I was just all full of emotion and just wrecked. And we make terrible decisions based off of emotion. And so there was one night where I was just like, I don't even want to admit this,
Oh, you got to.
but I had a moment where I was like, I wonder if he's dating someone else or what is he doing? Like,
Right.
I
She
just,
had this moment at 3 o'clock in the morning.
yeah. So I noticed that he was creating distance between us, but he was still in South Florida, so he hadn't left yet. So I'm like, okay, he's creating this distance because he's dating someone else. That's what I thought.
That's what you think at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And so I might have
Might have.
driven. I might have driven by his apartment at 3 in the morning because I wanted to see if there was somebody's car in the
So she can
driveway.
slash some tires, y'all.
No, welcome back to Intentional Rising. I'm Jennifer, your host,
And
and
I'm Festus.
he's
Finally back.
back. You don't say finally. You were only gone a week.
Yeah.
What are we talking about today, babe?
We are talking about babies and no, I'm just kidding. We're talking about we get a lot of comments about our breakup, right? And at first I didn't think there was much to talk about there, so we never really made an episode about our breakup. But we thought the best thing to do would be to talk a little bit about our breakup, but to go into it with just basically being in the waiting process, right? When you're waiting on your future spouse, what to do, practical tips and tricks, I
Maybe what
guess.
we wish we might have done differently.
Right, right. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay. The breakup happened because Festus couldn't figure out where he wanted to be.
Yes.
We met.
I'll take the blame on that one.
Festus was here as a travel nurse,
Yeah.
and we met on Match.com, which you all probably know by now, but we did not, neither of us thought that this was going to,
We
when
didn't
we
think,
went on that first date, neither of us really had any real
right, because
expectations.
we understood that I was here for 3 months. It wasn't, something, but I ended up having to stay 3 more months.
He didn't have to. He chose to extend his contract.
I extended my contract 3 more months. And then as we were kind of getting more serious, it became an issue because you didn't want to live your life 3 months at a time. And
Right.
I didn't have clarity that this is where I wanted to be, that I wanted to live in Miami. I didn't know. In my mind, I always thought I would end up back in Virginia where I was from. So it was really hard for me to say to her, hey, yeah, let's get into this relationship and, I'm going to stay here because I had no intention of being here,
Right.
but apparently God did.
Right. For me, I had a long history of terrible relationships. And so this was the first relationship I had that truly honored God. And I had someone that was so good to me, so kind, so generous. Just, I had never had that before. So, of course, I wanted to like hold on to it. And I'm like, so even if he wasn't even thinking about marriage, I was so in on this relationship because I had just never been treated this good before. So it was very easy for me to fall in love with Festus and just really see a future with him.
Yeah. So
Whereas for him, what
for
was it for you when we met?
I just thought you were
My
just
feelings won't be hurt. You can be honest.
I honestly didn't. I think I was in such a place of temporary moves that I never let myself get to thinking about something serious that in that way. So I just didn't even picture us, regardless of how great you treated me, and which you did.
I think you're probably too far away from the microphone. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Just when I do the editing later, it's going to be a problem. So go ahead.
But regardless of how great you treated me, I was in my mind that I was leaving. So I didn't want to establish something serious and then having to leave, and then you get hurt, I get hurt, that kind of thing. I thought in the beginning we kind of had an understanding that I was here as a travel nurse, but as it started to extend, then feelings got a little more involved and it got harder.
So I think for me, it was confusing because from the beginning, while in his mind, he's like, oh, I'm just here on an assignment, I'm not going to be here long. I don't think he realized how much he didn't treat me like a temporary part of his life. And I think that that's because you were so used to having these long distance friendships. He had friends all over the country, and, he could speak to them once every few months and he still considered them a close
Yeah.
friend. Whereas I didn't see the world from through that lens at all. And so for me, the way that he was treating me, in my mind, I'm like, he's not treating me like this is temporary. So he must be planning to, he must be coming around to thinking that he's going to stay.
Yeah, and for me, I think it was just that's just how I was built, and that's how I was. So I didn't see that I was doing something different, but because of our different backgrounds, I could see how it was perceived that way. Yeah,
Right. And then I feel like a lot of men, and I know women, you can relate to this, putting a title on things is an issue
yeah,
for a lot of men. But it was never like that with Festus. Like when his friends would come in town to visit, he would introduce me as his girl. So that
yeah,
also in my mind, I'm like, he hasn't friend zoned me. He's always introducing me as his girl. So what, are you only planning for me to be your girlfriend on a temporary basis? Like, what did you think this was going to be? And I think he thought that maybe once he left and took an assignment somewhere else that we would continue like on a long distance relationship type of
yeah,
situation. But for me, I was like, I have a child. Like, long distance relationships might work for some people when there's a possibility that someone could be willing to move to where the other person is. But for us, I'm like, the only way this works is if you move to South Florida.
right,
I live in South Florida. I have a child here in South Florida. Her biological father is here, who she has a relationship with. And I also had my parents here because they had moved down as well. So
yeah,
my life was very much rooted in South Florida, and there was no chance of me moving.
right. And I think that was the struggle for me is that there was no chance at all of you moving, and so it almost looked like, hey, like if I stay, like, and especially because you had a child, there's no chance of you moving for like 10, 20, 10 to 15 years, you
Right.
know? And I had to really think, is this where I want to be for the next 10 to 15 years? If we were married and then decided to move later, we would definitely have to be here so you went to college at least. So that was a struggle for me trying to decide because it was bad enough to decide to stay here. Then it's now, are you going to stay here for the next 15 years?
Right.
So it's a lot going on in my head as far as, making that decision. It wasn't just an easy decision of being in a relationship with you and that's it. So basically about the breakup, how we got there. She got tired of living 3 months at a time.
That's exactly what I said. I can't keep
Yeah.
living 3 months at a time.
So I was having different contracts that would come up for me to leave, and somehow it would always fall through. That was God, obviously. It would always fall through, and I'd have to stay another 3 months and stay another 3 months, and I kept renewing my contract. And I agree, like it's hard to live not knowing what's going to happen in the next 3 months if I'm going to be there or if I'm going to be gone.
Right.
So that's what led to the breakup, and even after the breakup,
So we broke up after it was probably 6 months that
yeah,
we dated. And
yeah,
then I told him, I can't continue living 3 months at a time. And if you can't decide where you want to be, then, then we need to end things.
yeah.
And so that's what we did. But then, of course, I was still like teetering this line of like trying to still have him in my life and not completely cutting things off.
When she's the one that was trying to cut it off.
Yes, I was trying to break up with him, but I was being very double minded. I don't like that word, but that is what I was doing. Like, I'm like, one day I don't want him in my life, then the next day I do, because it would have been so much easier if he was like a crappy person, but he wasn't. And he was the best relationship I had ever had. And I had no ill feelings towards him other than the fact that he couldn't decide what he wanted. It was so hard to walk away from that. And he wasn't going to just shut me out and be like, "No, you
Too nice
said
of a
we're
person.
breaking up." He was too nice. So he allowed me to do that, and that was only making the breakup harder. It was making things more painful.
Right. I think that's when we started to say things that we didn't really mean all the
Yeah,
time.
I started to say things that were mean. Like, I think
Yeah.
I once said to you that I felt like I was losing my relationship with the Lord, and
That
that bothered you
that
a lot.
bothered me, right? Because I don't want to be that person that holds anybody back from their relationship with God. So at that point, I'm just like, okay, I gotta.
But that wasn't his
Yeah.
fault that I was feeling that way. I was feeling that way because once we had broken up and we're in this in between period of trying to stay in each other's lives, even though we're broken up, I was very frustrated and angry with God during that time. And because it wasn't working out, and I realize now that was dumb, but that's how I was feeling. And so, because of that, I was trying now to take things into my own hands and not trust God the way I had been trusting Him when we first got together. And through that, I was creating distance with the Lord. It had nothing to do with Him. It
Right.
was me. I was doing that, but I was shifting that blame on Him. Like, if it wasn't for you being in my life, then I wouldn't feel this disconnected from God.
Right. Right. And that was very hard for me to take. That should be hard for any man to take if you're responsible for somebody, or you at least you feel responsible for somebody's distance with the Lord. So once that was said, I kind of started pushing her further away.
Yeah.
Stopped answering text messages a lot more, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I started to feel like distance growing between us and like
Yeah.
him being more intentional about setting boundaries so that there wouldn't be any confusion of like this is still a relationship.
So we broke up for 2 years, right? And that was the main reason we broke up. But I really think that breakup was God's way of trying to get us into our waiting season. Nowhere in my mind was I thinking about marriage, right? Until we got into those 2 years. So I think that breakup was actually God making sure that we took the right steps before we got too serious.
Right.
Yeah.
But I wrestled with the way that we ultimately came to the place of breaking up
Hmm.
without when we broke up like the second time where I like we really shut things off and he was creating distance between us, all of those things. Because there wasn't any clear boundaries and we were still kind of in and out of each other's lives, I was doing crazy things. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
I showed up
Let's
at his
talk about it.
house.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about your
So
Puerto Rican
I
crazy
would get
things.
really in my feelings. Like, I'd be in, like I said, during this period, I was feeling very disconnected from God because I was dealing with my own things with the Lord. I was angry and because things didn't go my way and I was being a brat. I was. And so instead of really leaning into him in my quiet time and whatever, I was just all full of emotion and just wrecked. And we make terrible decisions based off of emotion. And so there was one night where I was just like, I don't even want to admit this,
Oh, you got to.
but I had a moment where I was like, I wonder if he's dating someone else or what is he doing? Like,
Right.
I
She
just,
had this moment at 3 o'clock in the morning.
yeah. So I noticed that he was creating distance between us, but he was still in South Florida, so he hadn't left yet. So I'm like, okay, he's creating this distance because he's dating someone else. That's what I thought.
That's what you think at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And so I might have
Might have.
driven I might have driven by his apartment at 3 in the morning because I wanted to see if there was somebody's car in the
So she can
driveway.
slash some tires, y'all.
No, I wasn't gonna
You would have
slash
slashed some
anybody's
tires. The
tire.
Puerto Rican and you would have came out.
Stop saying that. That's such a bad stereotype for
It's,
people. The
I'm
people are gonna get mad at you. You better stop saying that. You better stop
no,
saying that.
it's not a bad thing. It's just you're very.
So, yes, I showed up at his house and
Yeah,
thank the Lord that nobody's car was in the driveway.
right. From someone
Because
that
I'm
wasn't.
not
She
saying that
wasn't
I
gonna
was,
slash no tires, but thank the
I'm
Lord, but
just
nobody's
saying
car
in
was
that
there.
moment, I don't know. I wasn't in my right mind. I don't know what I would have done. But I didn't do anything because there wasn't a car there. So we cannot make assumptions about what I would have done. So he
Uh,
can say that I was
yeah.
going with the motive of slashing tires, but that is not what I
Right.
am going to say.
Right. Yeah. So I get a knock on my
I believe
door.
that the Lord wouldn't have allowed me to do that.
I get a knock on my door at 3 o'clock in the morning. I gotta work at 6 in the morning or 7, but I gotta get up at 6 in the morning.
The look on his face when he opened that door. So once I got there and I saw there wasn't a car there, I was like, well,
I'm
this is
already
a
here.
30-minute drive. I'm already here, right? Let me see what he's doing at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. That's what I had to deal with, y'all.
Whatever. It was
Yeah.
one time. And so he answered the door and he looked annoyed.
Yeah.
He was like
Yeah.
he was surprised and he was
But
like, "What are
me
you
being a
doing
nice
here?"
person, I let her in. She talked.
Cause yeah, in hindsight, he probably should have been like, "Listen, I gotta work in the morning. I have to be up in
Right.
3 hours. We'll have to talk about this another time," and sent me on my way. But he didn't do that. He was
I
like
let
he
her
let me
in.
in.
I let her get it off her chest. We talked for a while. It didn't change anything.
It didn't. But there was a clear no. It didn't change anything for him. But for me, in that moment was
You knew it
when
was over.
I was like, okay, this is over, and it is time for me to be at peace with this, and we set these boundaries and walk away from this. And so I knew I needed to get out everything that I needed to say because in my mind I wasn't going to see or speak to him again
Right.
after that.
And I think that's when you told me, don't come back to me
Right.
unless it's a direct word from God.
So it wasn't like a heated argument.
Yeah.
We weren't yelling at each other. We never had disagreements like that. That's what made this even harder because I wanted a reason to not like you. It would have made things so much easier. I wanted to be able to hate him, but there was no way that I could. And so we even hugged before I left, and I hugged him. The last thing I said to him was, I you'll always have a place in my heart, and the door could be open to this in the future, but I need you to be 100% sure that you have heard from God before you come back into my life, if that's what you decide. Because there can't be any going back and forth of you don't know where you want to be or what. He needed to be sure. And so I wanted him to have been sent by God if he came back.
Right. And I held on to that for that
The whole
whole
time
time.
that we were broken up.
I
I
held on
forgot
to
that I even said that.
Yeah, I held on to that. And I really think that was probably at that moment the Holy Spirit speaking through you because our whole journey would have been messed up had I came back earlier. You know,
Yeah,
our
there
whole
would have,
story would
and
have been.
like I said, he was such a nice guy that I could have continued showing up at his apartment at 3 in the morning
And
and
I
he
would
would
have
have
let her
let
in.
me in.
But yeah, I'm glad that was said and I held on to that. So we ended up breaking up, and that's when we really went into our waiting season.
Yeah,
Right. So I think we can go into talking about the waiting season because that's what a lot of people keep saying. It's like, what do I do during this waiting season? It's been forever. I've been waiting on God to speak, that kind of
right.
thing. So what were we doing during that 2 year breakup?
My waiting season started with, so after that night, I left his home crying my eyes out, like, okay, this is over. We've ended this. I began on this journey of trying to reconnect with God because I was angry about the breakup. And then, the enemy found his way to sneak into that. And someone from my past who was a friend, who I was still friends with, it's someone I had met shortly after I moved to South Florida, who was kind of like always in and out of my life, like kind of like as a friend, who was also a nice guy, but he did not share my faith and he did not share my love for the Lord. But I thought I could change that. And so
Missionary dating.
yes, I got into a missionary dating situation and I did begin to date someone else. So I would say this was probably, so that breakup happened probably in like April. That was in April when I said goodbye and things like were really over. probably 6 months later. So 6 months after that is when I got into the relationship with someone else.
Mhm.
During that 6 months, I was working on my relationship with God, but I wasn't like going all in the way that I should have been. I was also in a period of transition with my job. I had finished grad school, so I was now starting as a nurse practitioner. And so there was a lot of changes happening in my career and with my job. So I did have things keeping me busy. I was at a new church at this time, which you all know now from our testimony that Festus also
I ended up at that
transitioned to that
church
same church during that
unknowingly.
same time. We did not plan that. So I'm in this new church. I'm not really that connected there, but I'm listening to the sermons, I'm learning, and I'm trying to work on my relationship with God. But then as I'm getting deeper with the Lord, in comes this distraction of this person that became a person of interest that I ended up in a relationship with. And not that the relationship was bad. In this relationship, I'm thinking I can change him, and he's nice to me, he treats me well. I felt like something was missing, and obviously that was that I wanted someone coming to church with me on Sundays. I wanted that. Because he wasn't coming to church with me, I would find myself sometimes skipping church on Sundays and things like that. And I knew I wasn't supposed to be in this relationship, but I was trying to get over Festus, and it was the wrong decision. I know that, but I can see now how God used that
Yeah.
to get me back on track. In that relationship, I saw, yes, someone can be very kind and be a good person, but if they do not share your faith and your love for the Lord, you're always going to feel like something is missing. And I was not in a place where I was willing to settle, but I also didn't have the strength in that time to just walk away because the person was nice. If he treated me bad, it would have been easier to walk away. But you see how the enemy is like crafty. So all my other relationships have been terrible. I get Festus, the best relationship I've ever had, which I know was God. And then we break up. It doesn't go my way. And so then now I enter into a different relationship. The enemy used my longing for a relationship, and you brought someone nice. Like, because there's no way I could have gone from this to someone who treated me like crap. That would have been an obvious, okay, no. It was a subtle, okay, I'm going from this person and now I'm going to date another nice person. But the difference is he doesn't share my faith.
Right. And I think in that moment also the enemy realized that, oh, these two together is going to be a problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they've broken up for a little bit. Here's my opportunity to keep that kingdom marriage from happening. And
Right.
so let me bring somebody else in, hope that works out so that I make sure these two don't ever get together. And I think that's a strategy the enemy uses a lot because the enemy's always going to make sure he can do whatever he can to make sure that whoever God has ordained for you to be with, you don't accomplish that.
Right.
Right. So if he can bring in
A
counterfeits,
distraction. Yeah, it was a
counterfeits,
counterfeit for
distractions,
sure.
whatever he's going to do to keep you from marrying the person God ordained for you to marry, he's going to try it. And I think
Yeah.
in a way that's what was happening there.
And in this relationship, it was a sexual relationship. I went back to having sex, and I was like, I tried it God's way, it didn't work, and I'm gonna do it my way. I didn't feel good about it. That was another thing that was eating me up inside, was that I had compromised in that area, and I knew I wasn't in the right place. And every Sunday that I would go to church and he wouldn't be with me, sometimes I would go to church and this guy, I would see him. Once we realized we were at the same church, by this point I knew it was him. I'd be at church, and it would be another one of those Sundays where, so this was in March by this point. I remember this because it was around my birthday. And he still hadn't, it had been months that me and this man
I'm
were
still here.
together. And Festus still hadn't left. And this man still had not once come to church with me. And so
Not me,
then,
but the
right,
other guy.
not, yeah, the other guy. And so it's one of those Sundays around my birthday that I was really let down by the fact that he didn't go. And I'm sitting in church and I look towards the front, and I see this guy with his Bible in hand. And it was like in that moment, I felt the Holy Spirit speaking to me, like, you went from this to this. Like, what are you doing? And like, then it was an obvious like comparison there. Like, this is why you feel the way that you feel. This is what's missing. What you want and what you know is the right thing for you is to have a man of God and to be in a relationship with a man of God. And so, even though this man is nice, this is not who I've chosen for you. And I knew that. So, it was after that Sunday where that was clear that I said to the Lord, I said, okay, I know you're trying to tell me something and I hear you, but I'm having a really hard time. And so I know I'm not supposed to be in this relationship. I need you to remove this man from my life because I didn't have the strength. And I'm not saying that this is how it's going to work for everybody that's in a relationship that they're not supposed to be in, that you can just give it to the Lord and be like, make it easy for me and remove
Yeah.
the person. In my situation, it did work out that way. And thank God I remained somewhat connected to the Lord despite this during this time of me kind of rebelling and doing my own thing. Because had I not, it would have been easy for me to just slowly stop going to church altogether and just settle into life with this other person the way that was comfortable for them without church, without God, without any of that. And my life would look very, very different today had I done that. And that's
Exactly how the enemy
exactly where
planned
the
it.
enemy would have been able to shut down us ultimately coming together um,
Yeah.
with that. So I was still connected to the Lord, even though my relationship wasn't where it had been. And I submitted it to the Lord. And the moment I did, and I said, okay, I'm surrendering this to you, Lord. I can't do this anymore. I know I'm not supposed to be in this relationship. Remove this person. That's what happened.
Yeah.
And he ghosted me. And I'm so thankful. I'm sure he probably felt bad. Like he did leave me a message saying that he felt like you're a wonderful woman. I'm sorry if I hurt you, but I'm a coward. So he left that like on my voicemail or via text or something like that, but would never answer the phone when I called him. So I never got any kind of clear explanation from him.
So he ghosted you.
Yes, he
That was
did.
obviously God, right?
Yes, it was. I never asked you, how did you, because I was posting on social media. And so it was clear that I was in a relationship. And how did that make you feel?
Well, I wasn't I wasn't hurt by it, but I did feel a way about it.
Oh, what way did you
I
feel?
think I could easily tell that you were trying to make me see that you were in a relationship, right? Because you were not a big social media person or anything, but in this time you started posting stuff with you and this guy and everything.
Hmm.
So it was very easy to see that you wanted me to see that, which then made me think like, is this a legitimate relationship or is this something to get back at me? Uh,
Mm, okay. So you were already thinking that maybe it was a me just
yeah,
trying to get over.
I never thought it would last. God's honest truth. I never thought it would last just because of how you were presenting it. It just felt that it was for me to see it, you know?
Mm. I mean, that wasn't the case. I really was in the relationship trying to get over you,
Yeah,
but he's right. I wasn't a big social media person. I did not flaunt my life a lot on social media, but that relationship I did share on social media. So I don't know if maybe part of me probably did that so that you would
so I
see.
would see it.
And then the other part of me probably also was doing that because I thought that Festus was in another relationship too.
Yeah, I mean, during this time, I dated, but I wasn't ever in a dating relationship or anything. And I had a friend that even was more interested in me beyond a friendship, and I was very upfront with everyone in the beginning, like, "Hey, look, I'm here for a certain amount of time. I'm not interested in a relationship." So I think it just wouldn't have made sense in to know that I had such a great person and the reason I left them is because I don't plan on being here long term. And then to go get in another relationship, it just wouldn't have made sense. So
Right.
during that time, yeah, I dated a few times, but I didn't ever go get into a dating relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
And so also when I had heard from someone that he was in a relationship, I never verified that this was true. I just went with what I heard. I may have confronted him about it, but he, like, sent him probably this really long, nasty message on Facebook accusing him, and but without clearly saying that I know he was in a relationship or anything like
Which I
that. So
wasn't.
he had no idea what I was talking about. He was
Yeah.
just like, "Okay, she's giving another me more reasons that us breaking up was the right thing."
Right. Right.
And so I sent him this nasty message, and that just created more rift between us. And
Yeah.
that he had no idea for 2 years why I was even upset with him or what I was even talking about in that message that I sent him.
Yeah.
So that was also part of probably what pushed me into even getting into a relationship, was because I thought that he was in a relationship. I'm like, he's moving on. I need to move on too. Let me take this into my own hands. And yeah, so the first year, I would not say I waited well at all.
Well, I don't even think we can get into talking about waiting. I don't think you're in a waiting season until you start that preparation process, until you start that work that it takes to be waiting for your future spouse. Just being single doesn't mean you're waiting, you know?
That's 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 a good way to put
Yeah,
that.
it's not. That's why a lot of people sometimes they're like, God, I've been waiting for like 5 years for this marriage, and you're not doing anything and this and that. And no, God is like, no, you've been single for 4.5 years, but you've been waiting for 6 months.
That's true. Wow.
Because that waiting time is when you're waiting, it actually takes a lot of work. It's like a lot of preparation.
Working on yourself, your
Exactly.
relationship with the Lord, all
Exactly.
of those
So that's
things.
why I was also asking, like, when did you start waiting? Because that point where you start waiting is usually the time where you got close to God, where you actually submitted that relationship or you submitted that future relationship to God. And that's when your waiting season starts, when you start to fast and pray.
Okay.
And, that's the waiting
So
season.
I would say for me then, of the 2 years we were broken up, my waiting season started after a year, because that
Okay.
first 6 months was me kind of trying to reconnect with the Lord, and then that next 6 months I spent in a relationship I wasn't supposed to be in, and then when that relationship ended and I fully surrendered everything to the Lord, and I started a fast shortly after that, where I was fasting from men and relationships in general, and I was just focusing 100% on my relationship with God, trying to reconnect with the Lord to even see if marriage was what he wanted for me,
Hmm.
and to make sure that I was just, more than anything, I missed my relationship with God. So that was where my focus was. And so I would say that's probably when my waiting season began then.
Okay. Yeah. I think for my waiting season, it didn't start, yeah, probably not that first year either. Because like I said, I
You were
wasn't,
still trying to leave
yeah,
and
exactly. I
worried
wasn't
about
in the right
work and
place.
what,
I was
yeah.
still pretty lukewarm with God as far as hearing him. I believed I could hear God, but that was by a grace that he granted me with.
Yeah.
That I wasn't trying, but he was still speaking loud enough to get to me. But my waiting season didn't start up until I remember going through a lot of dark times. And then I got to a place where God kind of took everything from me. And I even tore my Achilles at one point. And when I tore my Achilles, couldn't work, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. And that's when God said to me, like, I had to physically stop you from running so that you can spiritually stop running.
Not to say that God imparted the injury on you,
No,
but that
not
he
no, he didn't.
allowed
He
it
allowed
to,
that to
he
happen.
got out of the way and allowed
Right.
it to
He
happen.
he he allowed that to happen because that was his way of getting me to where I needed to be. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard because God is telling you go here, do this, do that, and you don't listen. You're not obedient. So he'll step out of
You're
the
too
way.
distracted.
Right. So he'll step out of the way and let you go through something difficult because then you're going to come back to him. So it's tough love in a way.
Yeah.
um, but I think when I got to that season where I was like, okay, everything is just falling apart. Let me get to God now. Let me for sure get to God. And once I stopped running from God, that's when my waiting season began because then I said, okay, I remember what she said to me in that she wanted me to clearly hear from God before I came back to her. And now let me start praying about that. So that's when my waiting season started.
So, would you say that we probably started our waiting seasons around the same
I think we
time?
probably did. I mean, I don't think we can put it together. I mean,
Yeah.
we can put it together now, but God probably made it work out just like that for our waiting
Yeah.
seasons to begin at the same time. Because when you're waiting, the amount of work that you have to do is not just for you, it's also for the person. It's not whether you know them or not, because sometimes you're waiting and God's already shown you who that person is. Or
Mhm.
and sometimes you're waiting and you have no idea who you're just in a time where you're single.
Did you always know that you wanted to be married?
Yes.
So that was
100%.
never a question for you if you would ever get married?
100%. 100%. I always knew I was gonna be married. I knew I was gonna have kids, all that. So because of the family I grew up in, that's what was normal. And so there was no doubt in my mind that I was gonna be married. You didn't?
Um, Prior to meeting you, I don't know that I ever, because my relationships were so horrible.
Mm,
I don't know that I wanted marriage or that I even thought that that was something that was in my future. I guess I didn't even wanna get my hopes up, and then, like I said, my relationships were horrible, so
yeah.
I didn't even think about it that way, and then I met you, and that was probably why it was so easy for me to just become so attached and feel the way that I did for you so fast because of how well you treated me, and then me being able to start thinking about, oh, marriage, maybe that is something that I could see for myself in the future if it
Mhm.
was with someone like Festus. But having that knowing that I will, I think there was even a long season of my life where I said I would never get married. I believe I spoke that over myself
Wow.
before.
Yeah.
And yeah, so ladies, don't speak that over your life because your mouth blesses and curses. So unless you
Right.
truly don't ever want to be married, but me saying that was from a very broken, hurt place that I was saying, "Oh, I'll never get married. I don't want that, whatever."
Right. Which regardless, I think you mentioned it, how our mouth, your tongue can bless and curse. And so regardless of where we're at, we have to be very, very careful what we let out of our mouths.
Right.
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 Because the enemy is just waiting for it to just pounce on it.
Yeah. Okay, so you always knew that you wanted marriage and that
Mhm.
you would get married. And when we were together before the breakup, we were both in our late 20s.
Yeah.
You turned 30 during that
Well,
breakup time.
I age the other way, so I get younger. So
Oh, whatever.
just saying.
You turned 30 during that breakup. And so, did you ever have like an age in mind of when you might get married? You just were like,
I never had an age. I grew up in an environment where it wasn't forced on you as a man to get married. Like it wasn't like my mom never said, "Hey, you got to get married. I need my grandkids." That never came out of my mom's mouth. So I had this, I don't know what to call it, just ease about my
there was
situation.
no
There was
pressure.
no pressure. That's the word.
Mm,
There was no pressure at all. So I just kind of went about it and was like, "Wait, it'll happen when it happens. It'll happen in God's time." But there's a lot of work
right,
that you're required to do for it to happen too. And I think I was naive in thinking that, oh, in God's time it's going to happen. That's true, but there's also a time for you to really seek God about it.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you knew you would always get married.
Yeah.
You didn't have a timeline on it. You
No.
felt no pressure.
No.
After about a year of us being broken up is when you feel your waiting season actually started. So
Started.
what changed that? So would you say that that's when you started actually thinking, okay, I want to start preparing for marriage?
No, I think that's when I started looking at you as someone I really, really wanted to be in a real relationship with. And I wanted to be in a relationship to where it was leading to marriage. Right. And for me to have something that's leading to marriage, I need to start praying about marriage.
But at this point, like a year after the breakup, I was in another relationship. I
Hmm.
broke up with the other person. You and I were still not speaking. By this point, we knew we were at the same church.
Yeah.
We would see each other from time to time just at church in passing,
Okay.
but we were not like truly in conversation with each other.
Yeah. We were not truly in conversation, but I think it stuck in my head that don't go back to her. Right. I got to a point where I was like, I think I was starting to realize that God is going to keep me in Miami. And if he's going to keep me in Miami, who better to be with than,
Okay.
right?
Okay, so by
So
that point, all of the assignments falling through
everything's
and
falling through.
everything's
I'm
not working out for
realizing,
you to
like,
leave,
I
you're
mean,
like,
I'm telling
"Okay,
you,
I'm
like,
gonna be
I had
here."
maybe like 7 or 8 farewell goodbye parties at work.
Yes. He
Like
was,
every time I
yes.
thought I was leaving, something else fell through and I would have to stay.
And I would see this on
Social
Instagram
media,
every time he was having a goodbye party and they were doing a send off for him. Like, how many times are gonna say goodbye to this guy?
yeah. Yeah, it got to a point where they thought I was intentionally doing it so I would have some I would have a cake.
He at one point even got the Nurse of the Year award as not one of their staff. Like, it
Yeah.
is unheard of for a traveler to be in the hospital
For that
so
long.
long and get the Nurse of the Year award. And I think at one point they even told you, okay, you've been considered a traveler here for too long, so now you have to end your employment with us. And if
And
you want to stay, you have to re-sign on as a
so yeah, that I
staff.
think that's actually what led to my waiting season. So and remember I said God was taking everything away from me? That was one of those things.
Mhm.
So it got to a point where they said you've been here so long that you need to take at least 3 months off for you to not be a Florida resident and still continue as a traveler. So in that 3 months off, I was like, okay, I get some time to rest and relax and that kind of thing. So I took that time, and towards the end of that time, where I would start to go back,
Yes, that's when you tore your
when I would start to go back, I'm telling you, like, I was supposed to go back to work on a Monday. I tore my Achilles on a Friday. My insurance hadn't started yet. So it just became like everything was taken. Now I'm in financial trouble. I need to have surgery. All these things are happening. And I think that was God saying, hey, you had those 3 months to get closer to me and you didn't. So I moved out of the way and you're going to have a lot more time now.
yeah. Yeah.
And so that's at that time when I started looking at the fact that I'm going to probably be here for a
Right.
while.
And during that 3 months when you were off of work was also when I had the dream that Festus was my
There you
husband.
go.
I had done my fast, and so that was in July. I had the dream that Festus was my husband. Then you had your injury in August. He had surgery in September, and I'm the one that took you to your surgery.
Yeah. You took me to my surgery and all went well. We came
Yeah.
back, and now I'm starting to feel more and more like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this girl, but there's a few words that have been said that kind of still. I think at one time you gave me an ultimatum about something. I can't remember what it was because I remember talking about.
That wasn't at that time though. That was
No, you
later
you did
on.
it. You did it at the surgery place.
No, I didn't.
Maybe I forget, but I remember coming back and me and Kelly were talking
Festus
about
is a very
it.
poor historian, guys. I've
No, he's
told you
not.
guys that
Your mouth blesses and
before.
curses. No, he's not.
Okay, he's
Thank
not.
you.
He's not. His memory is very, very good.
I have great memory. Yes,
Uh-huh.
very good
We're
memory.
believing for that. But
But
yes,
yeah,
so during that time,
oh,
I'm being there for him. I'm supporting him, helping him, like taking him to his surgery, offering to help in any way that I can because at this point, God has revealed to me in a dream that he's my husband. He doesn't know any of that. He doesn't know about the dream. So I'm just trying to be there for him because I know that this is the person I'm going to marry someday.
and that's an important thing to discuss, right? About the waiting season, right? Where just because God reveals to you who your future spouse is, that doesn't mean your waiting season is ended. And I think a lot of people look at it in that way that once God has shown me that that's my future spouse, they one either think their waiting season has ended, or two, they decide they needed to tell this person
Right. No.
because they're that if God shows it to me, that means it's time for me to get married, and that's not the case.
It was actually no. When I once I had that dream, like I actually got nervous.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, I'm gonna marry this man. So, but am I gonna be a good wife? What does the Bible say about being a good wife? So that prompted me to start reading Proverbs 31, finding scriptures in the Bible about marriage and about being a wife because I was like, now that I know that I'm going to be a wife, like I need to know what that is, like what God wants from me as a wife, like how I fulfill that role in a way that's honorable to the Lord.
How is it being in a waiting season when you know who your future spouse is going to
So
be.
I don't even like to consider it a waiting season. I like to consider it more preparation because if you
That's
focus on the
right.
preparation,
But I
then you're
think
not
that's what a
waiting.
waiting season is. A waiting season is a season of work and it's a season of preparation. That we
Right,
call it waiting, but I think so many people take that word waiting so literally that where they think they have to sit back and wait for
right,
something, right?
right,
Because I think the reason it's called a waiting season is because you're waiting on God to deliver your future spouse. You're not waiting on your future spouse to come to you. And in a
right,
lot of cases, that's how people think about it. I'm waiting for the right man to come about. I'm waiting for the right woman to come about.
right,
When really, no, I'm waiting for God to reveal to me who this person is. I'm waiting for God to
right.
bring this person to me. And in order for God to do that, there's a lot of work to be done on your
And
end.
I didn't stop living either.
Hmm.
So during that time, and even after I had already received the dream, I was, the Lord blessed me with being in the position of being able to purchase my first home. If I was quote unquote waiting and I know I'm going to be a wife, and so
Yeah,
why would I go ahead and buy a house without my husband? But God
no,
never told me to do that. He
no,
never said, no, don't,
no.
So I kept moving forward, buying, purchasing a home,
Yeah,
all of these things, which later blessed
both of
our
us.
both of us,
Yeah,
became a blessing to both of us when we were then able to sell that home and buy a home together. So I didn't put my life on hold
yeah.
in
Like
any type of way.
that's the thing. Waiting, it's not a literal thing. I think I've said it before. It's not just because it says waiting does not mean everything stops. And I'm just gonna sit back and I'm waiting for
So
this
maybe we'll
man.
just stop referring it to as
No,
your waiting season and
no,
refer
I
to it
love it.
as season of preparation.
I love calling it a waiting season. I do because there's a patience that comes with the idea of waiting.
Yeah.
Preparation doesn't really. You don't think about the word patience when you think about
Mhm.
preparation. When you
Right.
think about
Right.
waiting, you think about, so I love calling it a waiting season. I just think that we have to understand that waiting doesn't mean sitting back.
Right. And I think for a lot of us as women too, and well, men too, when especially once you know who the person is, you just think, okay, I'm just sitting around waiting for them to be ready.
Right.
And that is not the case.
No,
There's
no.
so much that you can be doing
I
during
was
that
thinking about
time
it the other day and I was like, I was thinking, why did God reveal it to her so early before me? Right. And
because I needed to learn patience.
one, yes, maybe because I had a lot of patience, so I didn't.
Yes.
So if God revealed it to me, I would have waited 3, 4 years if I had
He was very
to.
gifted in that area. Me, that was definitely a
Right.
weakness.
But you also
And
had the wisdom to know not to tell me that. That was big. But I think sometimes the other person knows first because their preparation requires them helping with prayer for you, right? So you had to start praying for me. And I think even in your list of prayers, at some point you said, these were a list of prayers that I was saying just for Festus, just for how for things that he needed to be better at in his life, right? And I think that's all part of why sometimes God shows it to you first, because there's sometimes spiritual things that this other person needs to get over, right? And spiritual battles that they need to be able to tackle, and your ability to help them in prayer will get them there faster.
mhm,
And I think in our situation, that's why God revealed it to you first, because I had a lot more spiritual things going on in my life,
right.
um, and it wasn't things that I could handle by myself. To the point where God revealed it because we have this spiritual connection, where even before we were married, even while
Before we were
before we
back
were
together,
dating,
yeah,
yeah, I knew when to pray for you about something, and you knew when to pray for me about something, and then
without
later,
us even telling
with
each other.
ever, yeah. So I think sometimes that's for us at least. That's why God revealed it to you, so you can start praying for me while you're preparing for yourself,
Mhm.
and that's why I also really, like you said, it's not for you to go tell the person when God tells you, right? You can continue to wait, continue to pray about it, and pray that God reveals it to that person in His own time.
Right.
Yeah,
I guess what we're trying to say is that the biggest thing you can be doing during that season is drawing close to God and
right.
um, checking yourself, like asking for the Lord to reveal the things about you that
Hmm.
He needs to work on, the things about you that are going to make you a better life partner for whoever it is that he has for you in the future instead of being so focused on what that other person needs to
Yeah.
be and where they need to be. Also focus on where you need, because you're not perfect. None of us
No, not
are.
at all.
We all have things that
Uh-uh.
we need to work on,
Yeah.
even once you're already married. Like, it's that pruning never ends.
No.
Like, it's just a
Uh-uh.
constant, refining. And it ends when you shut God out
Yeah.
and you stop growing.
Yeah.
But as
Yeah.
long as you keep God at the center of your relationship, He is always going to be showing you you're ugly. Always. And it does not feel good. And it can be super
Yeah.
frustrating, but I think for me, it helped transitioning into marriage because he had shown me so much of my ugly when I was in that season of waiting, that then by the time we got married, I was kind of used to, okay, now I need to fix this. Okay, now this too, dang.
And I think that's
It's
I
always
think that's why
something.
sometimes you realize that while I was in the waiting season, God was having me work on this, and then once I get married, this is why we were working on this,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Uh, but that's why the waiting season is really a working season. It's really a preparation season, because there's things that He's preparing you for in your marriage. You're
right.
not going to know it in that time, but if you'll just be obedient and listen to that voice telling you that, hey, today or this time, we need to work on your patience. We need to work on your prayer life. We need to work
Mhm.
on your fasting life.
Right,
Those kind of things. If you can be obedient to God about that, you'll see later when you get married why you had to do that.
right. Don't waste your waiting season. That's my biggest advice.
Right.
I think that I did not wait well, because if I was waiting well, I would have established more discipline in having better habits and being more disciplined in my spiritual life in nurturing that relationship with God
Right.
and maintaining and reading my Bible regularly. All of these things I was doing while I was waiting, that then when we got married, though a lot of those things over time quickly like became secondary,
Right.
and God was no longer the priority. So I see now where I wish I would have spent more time in that waiting season, because you don't realize how much time you have until you don't have all that time anymore. When you're married and you start having children, especially, and all the time that you used to have when you were single and you were waiting
Yeah.
is gone. So don't take it for granted. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I tell all of my single friends now. Don't take that time for granted.
Yeah. Your waiting season is just, it's such a precious time that you have to really just fall in love with. It's very easy for us to be discouraged, and that's natural. Where you're going to be discouraged at points during
Mhm.
your waiting season, but understand that this is a sacred time that you're not going to have anymore.
And I think we get discouraged because we feel lonely.
Yeah.
But fill that loneliness and that time alone with everything that you can of God.
Right.
Because
Right.
ultimately, strengthening that relationship with the Lord, that's what's going to get you through all of that. And it's not only just getting you through until you have someone, it's getting you through so that you have established a strong spiritual life, a strong spiritual walk with the Lord, so that when you do get married, those things remain front and center, even in your marriage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're just now really getting into a place of developing and being very disciplined in our walk.
Because I didn't, at the same the way you didn't, I didn't wait very well. I didn't realize I was in a waiting season until it was like further along. So I think for a lot of people, they have the privilege of knowing right now that this is my waiting season. I'm in that waiting season. So don't take that for granted. Go to God. Make sure your prayer life is on point. Make sure your fasting life is on point. Make sure that you're treating this waiting season like it's your baby, basically. Like it's, you love that thing. And because it's later on, you're going to realize just how you benefit from it.
Right.
You don't realize the benefit now. Right now, it just seems like, oh, I'm just lonely. It's just a difficult time. I'm waiting for my man or my wife or whatever it is. But you don't realize until later that, man, I really needed that waiting season because it set up so much of what's going to happen in your future.
One thing I wish I would have done while I was in the waiting season, I wish I would have tried to mimic life as a married person in
Mm-hmm.
terms of getting up at 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that I have my quiet
Mm-hmm.
time with the Lord. That being a big one, because that's what I have to do now.
Yeah.
If I'm going to have uninterrupted time with God, I have to get up at 5 a.m.
Kids will be
And
up at
that is the
6.
reality. I did not have to do that when I was single and I was in my waiting season. I could just be with the Lord whenever I wanted. Yes, I did have a child, but she was older and she was self sufficient at this point.
Mm-hmm.
She wasn't young, so it was still easy for me to tell her, like, okay, you go do your homework, watch your show, whatever, and I can go have some quiet time with God. So I
Yeah.
wish I would have mimicked what life would be like,
Yeah.
because now, like, is your quiet time with God important enough to you? Is it a big enough priority that you're going to be able to easily transition from having it whenever you want throughout your day to being disciplined about doing it at 5 a.m. every day?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not easy.
It's not at
So I
all.
wish I would have started working
Yeah.
on that when I was in that single season and I was waiting, because then it wouldn't have been so quick to be replaced with other things, because very easily when
You
we
would have
got
had a
married,
structure.
I had no structure.
Yeah.
So the first thing to go was that quiet time that I would have with God, and I would just kind of try to throw it in wherever, and then I had no
Right.
uninterrupted
So
time.
there was no intentional time with God. It was just you just fit God in
Right.
wherever wherever you could fit him in. But yeah, I do think that you're right. That waiting season, it's supposed to be a time where you really try to mimic what married life is supposed to look like, what you're supposed to be, the husband you're supposed to be, or the wife that you're supposed to be. That waiting season is when you focus on building those habits to
Right.
be a good wife, to
Right.
be a good husband.
Right.
So it's really, I never thought about it like
Yeah.
that.
I wish I
Yeah,
would have done that. I
yeah,
wish I would have been better about, like, my parents lived with me. They did everything for me. They helped me a lot. They took a lot off of my plate so that I could have so much time
yeah,
to spend with the Lord. And I'm so grateful for that. But I wish that I also wouldn't have taken that so for granted. And I would have taken more opportunities to cook, to do all of the things that I was going to be needing to do once I transitioned into living with my husband, and and tried to still incorporate, just get an idea of how to fit, like, how to have God in everything that I did.
right. Because that waiting season just it a good thing that it does is that transition. It makes it such a easier transition into marriage. If you really treat the waiting season the way you're supposed to, it's going to make your transition into marriage so much easier because everything that you're going to do in marriage, you've started
Right.
in your waiting season. And so it's man, I can't stress enough how important a true waiting season really is because it's just as important as your married season.
So we're talking about it from a place of we didn't get it right,
We didn't get it
okay?
right.
And
No,
so
we didn't
and
get it
we've
right.
had challenges because we didn't get it right.
Yeah.
So we want you guys to learn from our mistakes and try to develop your discipline in your spiritual life now
Yeah. It
if you
took us
aren't
7
married
years
yet.
to get it right.
Yes.
It took us 7 years to get it right. And had we focused on it during our time when we were single and waiting, man, we would have jumped right into it and had a structure, had habits in place, everything perfectly to where your marriage is it's a great start.
And so now when I'm reading my Bible throughout the day, or I'm spending any time with God throughout the day that is interrupted by my children, they're welcome interruptions. It's
Right.
okay, because I've already had my
Your
time with
quiet
the
time.
Lord by myself. And I want my kids to see me reading the Bible. I want my kids to have an image of that, and
Yeah.
that being a part of our home, and that, mommy and daddy pray all the time, mommy and daddy are reading their Bibles all the time, and that is what they see, because we sit on this couch while they're running around playing and we're
Yeah.
praying, or we're, reading our Bibles, and
Yeah.
they know what all of that
To
is.
the point where our youngest one, she's 2 years old and she'll watch us praying in tongues and
She'll be praying
she'll
in
be
the
like,
spirit.
she'll be trying to, she's like, I don't know if she knows
We're
what
just
she's
like,
doing, but
whatever, girl, do what you do. But
Yeah.
she
It's a
clearly
regular
knows what a
thing for
Bible
her.
is, and they want to read their Bible every night before they go to bed because they see us reading our Bibles.
Yeah.
But if that was the only time I was getting with the Lord, was just these times where it's constantly being interrupted by the kids, it would be really hard for me. I would have a really hard time with that. I would miss, and I did feel that way for a long time until we figured this out, where I'm just like, I miss my time with the Lord. And I would tell my single friends, like, I miss having uninterrupted quiet time with God. Like, I really, really miss that. Don't take that for granted. Until I realized, well, if you just got up at 5 a.m. before the kids were up, you could still have that quiet time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I have to do now. But I wish I would have started that discipline
Yeah.
sooner.
Yeah. Oh man.
What, any other things you
So,
wish you would have
well,
done
let's
differently?
give some practical tips, right? Practical tips for in your waiting season, something that you can work on is starting to build a habit of fasting, whether it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever it is. Just build a habit of fasting each week. It's what it's doing is it's getting you closer to God, but it's also getting you to be able to hear God, be able to discern God's voice a lot easier. And when you're in a season like that, it's very important for you to be hearing God because the enemy's going to try to bring the counterfeits. The enemy's going to try to make sure that you don't end up with the person God has set aside for you. So you have to have a good sense of discernment to know that no, this one's a counterfeit. I know something else that God has promised me for, and this is not it. Because the enemy's going to try to give you exactly what you've been praying for in a way.
Hmm.
But there's going to be something missing that you don't see if you're not in a constant relationship with God.
Right.
Yeah.
And so instead of being so focused on praying specifically for that person, if you don't know who they are yet, or if you do know who they are, so I know a lot of people have seen my video about the prayers that I prayed for my husband, and I feel like we're taking that too, people are taking a grip on that, and like that's the only thing you need to do. And
No,
no, that is not at all the
no.
case. There's so much that was happening, and so much that was just happening with me personally, and the transformation that was happening with me as a person that had absolutely nothing to do with marriage at all. And those types of things need to take place for you to be a better person and be able to be a better wife or a better husband. You have to do those hard, difficult, internal transformations. That only true transformation only comes with the Lord, and you have to spend time with Him to get there.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about these prayers that you're going to pray that are going to bring you a husband or anything like that.
You can pray all you want,
You
but if you're
that
not
that
close to
you,
God, you can't hear him.
right. That's just one piece of it. Praying for your future spouse is just one very small piece of the entire waiting season preparation process.
I love that waiting season preparation process. I love that.
Because
That's what it
that's
is.
what it
It's
is.
a waiting season. It's a season of work. It's a season of preparation. That's what it is. And I wish we would have treated it that way
Yeah.
because life would have been so much more easier.
Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. We can look
Hindsight
back at it
2020, we
now
can't look
and see all of the things
right,
that,
but we can help other people that are in this
yeah.
season, and that's all we're trying to do right now. So, like I said, so fasting once a week, I think that's a big one to do. It makes you have some kind of structure,
Hmm.
and then it gets you to where you're learning to listen to the voice of God because you're
Hmm.
so close to Him. Uh, and then I think if God reveals to you the person that you're supposed to, well, actually, before even that, like a lot of people say, God revealed to me who I'm supposed to marry, right? How do you know that God? Because sometimes they're like, God revealed to me who I'm supposed to get married, but I haven't really been praying, I haven't really been fasting, I haven't really like. How do you know God is telling you this?
Right. Exactly. We've gotten a lot of messages
Yeah,
where people are like, God revealed to me my spouse, and but I'm not even really attracted to him. It doesn't really look like this is who it should be. And I'm kind of confused that God is not a God of confusion.
no,
When God revealed to me who my spouse was, there was no confusion about it. It was very clear. I had the same dream 3 times.
right,
It was somebody that I definitely knew I was attracted to. There was no question there of,
right, right.
of
I
those
think
things.
I think there's a difference. Like God is God, not a God of confusion, so you shouldn't be confused. You can be in a place where you don't understand, but you'll
Right.
still have a peace about it, right? So if
Right.
God reveals to you, hey, this is your, if you get a revelation that this is your spouse, right? Make sure that you're not confused about it. If you're confused about
Right.
it, it's probably not from God.
But and also check the season of life that you've
Yeah,
been in,
yeah,
because at the time that it was revealed to me, I was in a season of fasting. I was very close to the Lord during that time. I was praying. I was living a very pure in all aspects of that word life
right.
during that time. Wasn't having sex, wasn't out here doing all of these things that can open doors for the enemy to
Bring a
send
counterfeit.
counterfeits.
Yeah,
And so, what you think is a dream or a word from God may not even be from God. You don't know what the source is of that information if you aren't living your life in a way that is,
yeah,
like spiritually aligned with the Lord. If
yeah.
you're not spiritually aligned with the Lord, you don't know where these dreams are coming from. You don't know
Exactly.
where these words are coming from. You don't know where any of these feelings that you have are
Yeah.
coming from. It might not even be God.
I think sometimes people think that, just because it's a dream and it's a positive dream and it's about
Right.
my wedding and it's about my
Right.
marriage, it must be from God. And that's not
But 9
always the
times out of
case.
10, what you will hear a lot of people say is that dreams that involve marriage and they are typically not what they appear, and they
Mhm.
usually aren't good dreams. And so I wish I would have said all of that before that whole video of ours went viral, because it's now turned into this thing where I know there's so many people that have had dreams about their spouse,
And they
and they're
assume that
now,
because I have a dream
because my dream turned out that way, but God speaks to everyone differently.
differently.
Like, I don't know how many times to say that, like,
Yeah,
and that is another part of the waiting season, getting so close to the Lord that you know how he speaks to you, because he
right,
speaks to all of us differently and in different seasons differently, because there's seasons where he speaks to me a lot in my dreams, and then there's seasons where he speaks to me in a different way. So you have to have that discernment, but to get that discernment, you have to spend time with the Lord. You have to know his character. You have to know things about him and have a relationship with him, so that if you have a dream and it's a counterfeit dream and it's not from God, you know the character of God. So you know that that dream's not accurate.
right,
Because God
right.
is not going to show you in a dream that someone else that's already married is your husband. That is not the character of God.
No,
He is not going to show you that in a dream. But if you lack discernment because you don't have a relationship with Him, you can have a dream like that and get confused and be like, oh, well, maybe this. And then the enemy leads you down a path
right.
where you're lusting after a man that is not your husband.
Yeah, yeah. And even seasons, I think when we talk about a season of waiting, I got to thinking about the idea of just seasons in general, right? If you think about it, you look at a calendar, it always says, this is the first day of fall, this is the first day of winter, first day of summer, that kind of thing. It says that on the calendar. But when have you ever seen that the first day of winter comes and all of a sudden the leaves all dry out and then it starts snowing?
Right. Like,
Like
it's not a
season,
seasons don't change overnight just because
yes,
of a day. There's
yes.
a progression into a new season.
Right, and that's I say that to say that you don't get to decide when your season ends, and a lot of times I think that's what people do, is that when God shows you that person, then you're like, "Oh, my season has come to an end. My waiting season has
I've
come to
been
an end."
waiting long enough. Here
Yes,
it
God has
is. It
showed me a
comes to an
dream,
end.
so yes, my season's over, my waiting season's
Yeah.
over. I need to go tell him that
But
he's my
God showed me in a dream, and I was still waiting for another 8 months
Yeah,
before Festus knew.
exactly.
And even then, when it was revealed to Festus, it was the okay for him to get into a relationship with me.
Yeah,
He still hadn't received the instructions on proposal. That was still a whole other another 6 months after that.
yeah,
So receive something like that and receive what you believe is a word from God,
mhm,
check where you are with God in that
yeah,
season in
yeah.
your life.
I think that's the important part is wherever you are with God is going to tell you whether you're hearing from him correctly.
Because I also think the reason why he showed me before he showed Festus was because my spiritual life was in a much different place than Festus was at the time that he showed me. Festus was still in this very busy place of trying to do all of these things, and he hadn't slowed down and quieted down to hear from
Hmm.
the Lord yet.
Yeah,
So,
I believe the reason he showed it to you before is because there was a lot of prayer that needed to happen for me. You
Mm.
had a whole list, which proves, you know, um, and prayer that needed to happen for things in my life, which is why I believe so much in that idea of fasting at least once a week. And I think if God has showed you who your spouse is and you know that's a word from God and it's a dream from God, it's time to start fasting for them on the day that they were born, on the day of the week that they were born, every week, because you are one time you are going to be one.
Mhm.
So the day of the week that they were born, everything that they may have come into agreement with, when you start fasting on that day every week, you're starting to break a lot of things.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important. I think we started
We
doing that,
did that
not
not
realizing it.
realizing the power in what we were doing.
Yeah,
We didn't realize I just happened to be fasting and he happened to be fasting. I didn't even know
we didn't put it
initially
together.
that that was a
Yeah,
day of anything like that. So once we put it together, we were like, wow, we've been doing this. We had no idea.
right,
And
right.
then we saw the power in it and
Yeah, because you're
continued.
going to be one. So whatever that person inherited or was spoken over their life from the time that they were born, you are going to be one with that person. So you need to start breaking, renouncing a lot of those things, even in a time where even in your waiting season,
Yeah.
just by fasting on the day that they were born. And if you are both engaged, that's a great time to start switching it up and being like, hey, I'm going to fast on this day every week, and you're going to fast on this day every week. And there's so much power in that, and there's so much that you can break by doing that.
Another thing that I did during our waiting season that I think was helpful, I read these books by Dr. Miles Monroe, the late Dr. Miles Monroe, about I think that I will look them up to get the exact titles and I'll put them in the description, but it was one was The Purpose of the man within God's kingdom and the purpose of the woman. And so I read the one for the woman first, and then I read the one for the man. I read both, and I definitely recommend that you read both because it gives you a perspective of the way that man was created and what God created man to be like, and then for man to have the perspective of the woman as well. So, first, read the one for you to learn about yourself and then read the one about the opposite sex because it really puts things into perspective for you on all fronts spiritually. It talks about sex in there, like just very very powerful books, and I'll put the titles in the description, but it really really helped me understand what a man's purpose
Yeah,
is according to God's word.
that's good. That's good. I think another thing is structuring your prayer life to where you have a set amount of time, whether 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day that you're praying, that is dedicated to your future spouse, right? To where it's not just I pray generally, but no, there's a certain time that I get to where this for the next 10 minutes, the next 15 minutes, I'm praying about my future spouse. And not that I'm praying about the person that God showed me, right? Because
Right,
how do you know God
right,
showed you that person?
right.
Especially when you don't know that God showed you that person. Not necessarily praying about that person. Oh, I'm praying about John. God, that you let John be my husband and this and that. No, praying about your future husband.
And I did do it that way.
Yeah,
So I had my list of prayers that you all know that I fasted and prayed, but
yeah,
those were under a general future spouse category.
yeah.
I had a lot of confidence that it was him because of the dream I had had, but I still generalized it in my prayers, like my future spouse. And then I had a completely different section of prayers that I prayed for Festus specifically that had nothing to do with him being my spouse.
Right.
And then I threw a little prayer in there that said, and all these prayers that I'm praying for my future spouse, can you just put those qualities in
Infest this.
Festus and make him my future spouse?
But yeah, I think being intentional about that time that you put towards praying for your future spouse is so vital.
I think
It's
I wish
just
I would have prayed during that time too over we have some amazing kids, but I don't think I was
oh, that's
intentional
a good one.
enough about praying over our future children, future pregnancies. I see so many people running into issues with fertility, such a rampant thing right now, which is such an attack of the enemy. And so I would definitely advise that before you are married, from the moment that you are in the secret place with the Lord and you're spending quiet time with God and you're praying and you're in your waiting season, you're preparing, you're praying for your future husband, start praying over your future pregnancies.
Mm,
Start
mm,
praying. If that is a desire of yours, is to have children, start from that day praying over those future pregnancies, because we take for granted, we take fertility for granted. And I think what we're learning now with all of the issues that we're seeing with people like getting pregnant, you never think you're going to have a fertility issue until you're there.
right,
And it's so scary. And
right.
I see so many of my friends walking through that. And I'm just like, wow. And then even things that can go wrong during pregnancy. And I know both of our children were born premature. And so I just think I wish I would have prayed during my season of waiting
Yeah.
very specific prayers over my future pregnancies.
And not just the pregnancies, but over your future children,
Yeah.
because even as they grow up,
Yes.
to have been praying about their development and
Yes.
everything that's going on in their lives from the time they're born until they're 18, 20,
Right. Because there's
40.
things that come up
Yeah,
now as our children are getting older that I'm like, oh my goodness, I wish I would have had the thought to even be praying about this from back then.
right.
So even if it's not something that's you've seen in your bloodline, there, anything that you would think to even be concerned about, if I went back, I would pray about every single thing over my
And
child,
and that's
because
why
you just
that
never know.
that waiting season, you think you have all this time, you really don't, because there's a lot that
Oh my
there's
goodness.
so much you can be doing, and this is all some of those
Because
things.
the enemy hates marriage. You are
The enemy hates
when you're
godly
preparing
marriage.
for marriage, especially a godly marriage, like, there is no time that other than spiritual warfare is, like, at an all-time high when you are preparing for marriage, because the
Mm.
enemy does not want you to marry a person of God, especially, and
Oh yeah,
two strong people in the kingdom coming together, forget it.
yeah,
He's going to try to do whatever he can to break that up.
yeah.
And so when he can't stop the marriage, where's he going to go next? Pregnancies, legacy, future children. He is going to try anything he can to keep you from growing the kingdom of God, keep you from multiplying. So, praying over your marriage before it starts, praying over your future pregnancies, praying over your fertility, your womb, everything,
Future
future
children, their
children,
development.
their development, them as adults, their future spouses. I mean, it goes
You can
on.
pray.
There's so much you can be praying about,
Yes.
but simply praying about your future spouse, do not stop there. That is not enough.
Mm.
You're just scratching the surface.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so if you think you're bored in your waiting season, then you're not waiting well.
Right.
You
I
should
love that.
not be bored in your waiting season. If you're
No,
bored in your waiting season, you're not waiting well, because there's so much you can be doing.
that's right. That's a good
You
one.
should never be bored.
They never, never. You should be, you should almost be like completely tired because you're doing so much praying in your waiting season.
Yeah.
You should be exhausted because, man, like you said, when we get to the point where you're having children and you have life starts happening and you're married, you're gonna wish you had that waiting season back.
Yeah.
You're gonna wish you had that quiet time.
Yeah.
Kids up at 6 in the morning, that means you gotta get up at 5 in the morning, where before you could get up at noon and still
Right.
have free time,
Yeah.
still have time to talk to God, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's so much you can be doing.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll have more talks about this, but
yeah, yeah. But this was good. I enjoyed it. It was things that we didn't get right, but we can at least hope that some other people will get right. It's a topic that a lot of people have been asking about, so I'm glad we finally got to it.
and it was hard for us to really get to it because we didn't feel like we waited well.
Right,
So you guys all see the happy testimony
right.
of how things ended up.
But that's also a testament to say that God redeems all.
Yeah, we didn't wait well and it turned out we
Well,
have a beautiful marriage. So it's
yes,
not that we don't have a beautiful marriage, but I feel like we could have.
we could have sped things along.
Yes, I think it didn't have to take us 7 years to get to truly be walking in what we feel like
Right.
God has purposed for us.
Imagine, I mean,
If we'd have been,
intentional rising may have come
yeah, I
4 years
think
ago.
intentional rising would have started much
Yeah.
sooner if we had been more disciplined during our waiting season.
Yes.
That's
So,
for sure. I think that's good. We'll
yeah.
see you guys
All
next
right.
week.
Hey,
Bye.